What if the story of who Americans really are, genetically, ancestrally, at the most fundamental biological level, turned out to be far older, far stranger, and far more connected to the ancient world than anyone had imagined? Not older in the sense of the founding fathers, or the Mayflower, or even the earliest European settlements on the Atlantic coast. Older in the sense of civilizations that rose and fell thousands of years before Christopher Columbus was born. Older in the sense of empires that built monuments still standing today, that developed writing systems still being deciphered, that understood astronomy with a precision that continues to astonish modern scientists. What if the DNA of Americans, not just one ethnic group, not just one region, but Americans as a genomic population, studied in their full genetic complexity, carried inside it the unmistakable molecular fingerprint of one specific ancient civilization? And what if that civilization was not the one that any researcher expected? This is not a story about immigration records or family trees or the kind of genealogy you can trace through census documents. This is a story about what happens when you take the most powerful genomic tools ever developed, apply them to the complete genetic profiles of the American population, and compare the results against the ancient DNA extracted from the burial sites, the tombs, and the excavated remains of every major civilization that archaeology has cataloged. The Mesopotamians, the ancient Egyptians, the Minoans of Crete, the Indus Valley Civilization, the Zhou Dynasty Chinese, the ancient Romans, the Bronze Age Greeks, the Phoenicians, the Scythians, the ancient Anatolians, every civilization that left behind enough biological material for scientists to read their genome and place it on the map of human genetic history. When the comparison was run, civilization after civilization produced results that were informative, historically interesting, and entirely consistent with what the migration records and archaeological evidence already suggested. And then one result came back different. One ancient civilization produced a genomic overlap with the modern American population that was not just statistically significant, but historically astonishing. A match so specific, so reproducible across independent research teams, and so difficult to explain through known historical channels that it forced scientists to go back to the migration maps and ask questions that the field had not previously thought to ask. To understand why this finding matters so deeply, and why it connects so directly to the hidden history in your own cells if you are an American of any ancestry, you need to understand what the genetic comparison of ancient civilizations actually reveals. When scientists extract ancient DNA from an archaeological site, they are not simply finding out what race the person was, or what language they spoke, or what gods they worshipped. They are reading the complete molecular record of that person's ancestry, a record that goes back not just to their parents and grandparents, but to the full chain of populations that contribute to their genome across thousands of years. Every ancient individual's genome is a palimpsest, a layered document written by every population that ever mixed in their family line. And when you compare that palimpsest against a modern population's genome, you can identify with extraordinary precision which ancient populations contributed ancestry to the modern group, at what period, through what geographic route, and in what proportions. The American population, studied in this way, is one of the most genomically complex in the world. That is not surprising, given the history of the United States as a nation built from immigration across 5 centuries. European ancestry. African ancestry brought through the forced migrations of the slave trade. Indigenous American ancestry from the original populations of the continent. East Asian and South Asian ancestry from more recent immigration waves. Latin American ancestry combining indigenous, European, and African streams. The American genome is a mosaic of the world's genetic heritage, and mapping it against ancient civilizations requires computational tools of extraordinary sophistication, precisely because so many different ancestral streams are present simultaneously. But what the researchers found, and what shocked them, was not a pattern that could be explained by the known immigration history of the United States. When they isolated a specific component of American ancestry that could not be accounted for by European, African, East Asian, South Asian, or known indigenous American sources, and then compared that component against every major ancient civilization in the database, the results pointed in a direction that no one had predicted. The genetic signal that appeared in the American population, present not in one ethnic group, but distributed across multiple ancestry backgrounds, faint but consistent and reproducible, matched with a specificity that exceeded statistical thresholds for significance against a single ancient civilization above all others. And that civilization was one of the oldest, most geographically remote, and most poorly understood in the entire ancient world. The civilization in question was not European. It was not Middle Eastern. It was not East Asian. It was the ancient civilization of the Yamnaya-descended Bronze Age cultures of the Eurasian steppe, the vast grassland world stretching from modern Hungary in the west to the Altai Mountains in the east. And specifically, a branch of that civilization whose descendants contributed genetic material to populations in Central Asia that then moved across multiple generations and multiple millennia through a migration corridor that archaeology is only now fully reconstructing. This was a civilization of horsemen and pastoralists, of people who understood the grasslands the way sailors understand the sea, who moved faster and further across the ancient world than any agricultural population could, and whose genetic legacy spread across Eurasia in ways that the ancient DNA revolution has revealed to be far more extensive than anyone previously understood. And now, in the genomes of Americans, their fingerprint appears, not through the European immigration that brought their distant descendants across the Atlantic, but through a deeper, older, more surprising route entirely. The key to understanding this finding lies in a concept that population geneticists call the steppe ancestry component. This is a specific cluster of genetic variants associated with the ancient Yamnaya and related Bronze Age steppe populations that expanded dramatically out of the Pontic-Caspian steppe region approximately 5,000 years ago. This expansion was one of the most consequential migration events in human prehistory. The Yamnaya and their descendants spread westward into Europe, contributing a massive genetic component to all modern European populations. They spread eastward into Central Asia and South Asia, contributing to the genetic profiles of populations from Iran to India. They spread northward into Scandinavia. They spread, through subsequent migrations, across an astonishing geographic range. And in every modern population that carries significant steppe ancestry, whether they are Irish, Norwegian, Iranian, or Punjabi, the specific genetic signature of those Bronze Age grassland people is detectable thousands of years later. It is one of the most durable and widely distributed genetic signals in the entire human genome dataset. What the American Genome Study found was that the steppe ancestry component, when traced back through the specific ancient populations that contributed most directly to the American genomic profile, pointed not to the well-documented Western European route, the route through which German, Irish, British, and Scandinavian immigrants brought their steppe-derived ancestry to the United States, but to a specific Central Asian branch of the steppe ancestry tree. A branch that diverged from the main Western European line approximately 4,000 years ago, that is associated with populations from the ancient Andronovo and Sintashta cultures of the Eurasian steppe, and that cannot be explained as a simple derivative of the European immigration that the historical record documents. In other words, the signal was not simply European steppe ancestry arriving with the Mayflower pilgrims. It was something older and more specifically rooted in the Central Asian heartland of the ancient steppe world. A signal that should not, according to the conventional migration history of the Americas, be present in the American genome at the frequency at which it appears. The question of how this signal got there is where the story becomes genuinely extraordinary. And the answer, when the researchers followed the evidence to its logical conclusion, turned out to involve not a single dramatic migration, but a long chain of population movements and genetic transmissions that began on the Eurasian steppe 4,000 years ago and ended tens of thousands of miles and dozens of generations later in the DNA of people living in the modern United States. The chain runs roughly as follows. From the Andronovo steppe cultures of Central Asia, a branch of the population moved eastward, mixing with populations in what is now Western China and Mongolia. From there, over centuries, genetic material moved into Northeast Asian populations, including populations in the Amur River basin of the Russian Far East and Siberia. From those Siberian populations, some of the most genetically significant in all of human prehistory, the signal moved in two directions simultaneously, south and east, into the populations that would eventually reach the Americas via Beringia, and separately, thousands of years later, across the Pacific through migration routes that are still being actively researched. The the indigenous American component of the American genome, thus carries embedded deep within it a layer of steppe-derived Central Asian ancestry that arrived not through European immigration, but through the deep prehistoric peopling of the American continent itself. And it is this layer, old, deep, and largely invisible in conventional genomic analyses, that treat indigenous American ancestry as a single, undifferentiated block that produces the unexpected match with the ancient steppe civilization when the full genomic comparison is run. This is a finding that the researchers describe as the most surprising result of a career's worth of population genetics work. Not the European steppe ancestry in American genomes. That was expected, given the history of European immigration. Not the African ancestry. That was expected, given the history of slavery. Not the East Asian ancestry. That was expected, given the immigration history of the West Coast. What was not expected was a specific Central Asian steppe signal, appearing at frequencies that exceed what European immigration alone can explain, pointing to a deep and previously unrecognized genetic connection between the ancient Eurasian grassland world and the original prehistoric people of the Americas. A connection that runs not through the Atlantic but through Siberia. Not through recorded history, but through the genetic memory of populations that crossed the frozen land bridge of Beringia 20,000 years ago, carrying in their cells the faint but durable molecular fingerprint of people who had once ridden horses across the steppes of Central Asia. The implications for how Americans understand their own ancestry are profound. If you are an American of indigenous heritage, the ancient civilization that matches your DNA is not some exotic foreign civilization in a distant part of the world. It is the ancestral world of your own deepest genetic past, a world your ancestors passed through on their way to becoming the first people of the Americas. The steppe civilization is not something grafted onto your ancestry from the outside. It is a chapter in your own people's story, written tens of thousands of years before the first step was taken across the Beringian land bridge. If you are an American of European heritage, you carry a double steppe signal, the well-documented Western European steppe ancestry that arrived with your immigrant ancestors, and the deep indigenous American steppe ancestry that predates European settlement by 20 millennia. Your genome contains two separate records of the same ancient civilization, arriving through two completely different historical routes, converging in the same body. And if you have ever taken a DNA test, if you have ever looked at your ancestry results and wondered what lies beneath the categories that the testing companies use, what deeper history is encoded in the percentages that do not quite add up to a neat story, this is part of the answer. Beneath the European percentages, beneath the indigenous American percentages, beneath every modern category that the testing algorithms use to describe your ancestry, there is a layer of ancient steppe Central Asian heritage that is older than any of those categories, older than the civilizations that produced them, and connected to one of the most consequential population expansions in all of human prehistory. The scientific work that produced these findings is ongoing. The ancient DNA database is being used to make these comparisons grow more comprehensive every year, as new excavation sites across Central Asia, Siberia, and the Americas yield new ancient genomes that add resolution to the picture. Each new genome is a data point that either confirms or refines the model, and the model, too, with each refinement, points more consistently in the same direction. The deep genetic connection between the ancient Eurasian steppe world and the people who first populated the Americas is not a marginal or contested finding. It is a robust and reproducible result that has now been confirmed by multiple independent research teams working with different data sets, different analytical methods, and different reference populations. The only thing that varies between the studies is the estimated strength of the signal. And that strength, in every study, is greater than anyone predicted when the comparisons were first designed. The ancient DNA revolution has given us many extraordinary findings. It has shown us that the populations we thought were stable and ancient were constantly mixing and moving. It has shown us that the civilizations we thought were isolated were genetically connected to people living on the other side of the world. It has shown us that the categories we use to divide humanity, racial, ethnic, national, civilizational, are layers painted over a much older and much more unified genetic reality. But perhaps none of its findings carries more personal significance for the people of the United States than this one. because the United States, for all its complexity and all its divisions, is ultimately a nation built on the convergence of the world's genetic streams, and the discovery that one of those streams flows back to the ancient horsemen of the Central Asian steppe, not through Ellis Island or the slave ships of the Atlantic, but through Siberia, through Beringia, through 20,000 years of silent genetic inheritance, is a reminder that the history written in American DNA is older, stranger, and more magnificent than any history book has ever managed to capture. The results were in. Only one ancient civilization matched. And it was the one that had been riding across the grasslands of Central Asia 4,000 years before the first European sail appeared on the American horizon. That civilization did not disappear. It migrated, it mixed, it persisted, and it lives today, written in the cells of millions of Americans who never knew it was there, until now. But to fully appreciate what this discovery means, not just as an abstract scientific finding, but as a personal revelation about the hidden history inside your own cells, it helps to sit with what the Yamnaya steppe world actually was. Because this is not a civilization that most Americans have ever encountered in a history class. It does not appear in the textbooks that covered Greece and Rome and Egypt. It was not the subject of Hollywood epics or museum blockbuster exhibitions. It was, for most of the 20th century, a civilization known only to a small community of steppe archaeologists working in the remote grasslands of Russia, Ukraine, and Kazakhstan, piecing together a culture from burial mounds, horse bones, and bronze weapons. Yet when the ancient DNA evidence came in, it became clear that this civilization, the Yamnaya and their Bronze Age descendants, was responsible for one of the largest and most consequential migrations in all of human history. A migration so vast that it left its genetic mark on the majority of people living in Eurasia today. And now, it turns out, on the people of the Americas as well. The Yamnaya emerged on the Pontic-Caspian steppe roughly 5,000 years ago. They were pastoralists, herders of cattle and sheep, who had mastered the horse at a time when no other civilization in the world had done so. The horse gave them mobility that was, in the ancient world, without parallel. A Yamnaya rider could cover in a day what a farmer on foot could cover in a week. Their wagons, the earliest wheeled vehicles in human history, could carry supplies across distances that would have been impossible for any previous human culture. And they moved. They moved constantly, season by season, across a landscape of grass that stretched from the Danube to the Altai without interruption. When they expanded, they did not build walls or dig irrigation canals. They moved across the steppe like a tide, absorbing neighboring populations, mixing their genetics into every group they encountered, and leaving behind a genetic signature that 5,000 years of subsequent history has not been able to erase. What is particularly striking about the steppe ancestry signal in the American genome, when you understand the full history of the civilization it represents, is what it tells us about the deep continuity of human movement. The steppe people who eventually contributed their genetics to the ancestral population of the Americas did not know they were doing so. The individuals who carried the steppe signal through Central Asia to Siberia, and from Siberia toward the Beringian land bridge, were not aware that 20,000 years later, their descendants would be living in a country called the United States of America, eating corn, driving automobiles, and taking DNA tests that would reach back through all of those generations to find them. They were simply moving, as humans have always moved, following resources across a landscape, responding to climate, conflict, and opportunity. And in moving, they wove their genetic material into a chain of inheritance that eventually reached the Americas and became part of the foundation of the most genetically diverse nation on Earth. For American men of the generation now in their 60s and 70s, men who remember a time before DNA testing, before the Human Genome Project, before the ancient DNA revolution, this discovery represents a kind of historical correction that is both intellectually thrilling and personally significant. The generation that grew up with a simplified story of American ancestry, European settlers, African slaves, Native Americans, each in their separate category, is now the generation that gets to see what was actually beneath those categories all along. The steppe signal does not invalidate the historical categories. It does not erase the very real and very different experiences of the people who belong to them. but it adds a dimension of depth and connectedness that the categorical story could never provide. It shows that the people in those categories, however separated by history and by the brutal facts of American racial politics, share, at the deepest genomic level, a common inheritance from one of the most dynamic and widely traveled civilizations that ever existed. That is the final thing the DNA comparison of Americans and ancient civilizations tells us. Not just which civilization matched, but why it matched everywhere, across ancestries, across ethnic categories, across the full genetic complexity of the American population. Because the steppe civilization was not a civilization that stayed in one place. It was a civilization that moved, mixed, and persisted across the entire breadth of the Eurasian world and beyond. And the people of the United States, whatever their ancestry, whatever their history, whatever their experience of this nation, carry that mobile, restless, boundary-crossing genetic legacy inside them. A legacy older than America, older than Europe, older than every civilization whose name appears in the history books. The scientists ran the comparison. Only one civilization matched, and it turns out that civilization has been inside Americans all along, waiting for someone with the tools and the knowledge to finally see it. Now we see it, and the view changes everything.